Hey, what's up guys? I hope you're doing fine. Maybe you're asking, who is this stupid donkey that I have to see in my screen? Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Pepe Cuenca and I'm a Spanish Grandmaster, and I'm here because I wanted to share with all of you a beautiful game that happened a few days ago in the Gibraltar Masters. And in this game, either Borya, a 2500 player, was facing Hou Yifan, the world women champion, in a game that, as I'm telling you, it was really spectacular because we could see a brilliant queen sacrifice, and there were a lot of tactical shots, some beautiful ideas, and that's why I wanted to share with all of you. So I'm gonna cut the trash talking, the bullshit, and I'm gonna start showing you this beautiful game. So Borya opened with d4 and Hou Yifan replied with knight f6, knight f3 and b6. And this is a pretty flexible move because now we can transpose to different openings. For example, if white plays c4, now e6, we are in the queen's Indian. So for example, g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, we are in the main line already. By the way, you can actually enjoy some video series by David Anton in Chess 24. But after b6, Borya decided to go for bishop f4, and we actually are entering in the London system. This is a system that actually is gaining a lot of popularity in the last months or in the last years. For example, Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, he used it a lot in the Rapid and Blitz world champion in Berlin, for example. So the idea is actually to play with e3, h3. This is actually giving some space to this bishop in case that it's attacked, for example, with some knight h5 at some point, then bishop e2, short castles, and then there are a few plans, for example, knight bd2 and c3, or c4 and knight c3. So it's a pretty calm system, but actually it's gaining a lot of popularity, as I'm telling you, and a lot of strong players are using it. So after bishop f4, of course, there are many possibilities for black, many different systems that are interesting to face this London system. But once you have played b6, of course, it's normal to follow with bishop b7, and now e3, and now different system, as I told you. So e6, d5, bishop e7, and the double fianchetto that actually happened in the game is something that, for example, Robin van Kampen recommended in his series about King's Indian when facing the London system. So g6 is a pretty natural move. So you place the two bishops in the two beautiful diagonals, and later you will decide if you're gonna break with c5 or with e5. So h3, this is a normal move, as I told you, just giving some space to this beautiful bishop, bishop g7 and bishop e2. Now Hou Yifan decided to go for g6, and white in this at this moment decided to go for c4 now. As I told you, for example, after short castle, there are some systems where white play with c3 and knight bd2. So for example, c3, knight bd7, knight bd2 and c5. This is what actually Van Kampen recommends in his series. So one of the ideas for white is to go a4, a6, and let's say bishop h2. One of the ideas is to try to push this e-pawn just to gain some space in the center. And there are some cute ways for black to avoid this. For example, I saw in some games some plans related with rook a7 and queen a8, just putting a lot of pressure in this diagonal, and also stopping this e4 move that white normally tends to play, let's say with rook e1 and bishop f1, for example, and e4. So, but this is another story, right? So let's focus on the game. So after d6, c4, now white aims to develop his knight via c3. So knight bd7, knight c3, short castle, and at this point there are different interesting moves. For example, knight e4 has been played in many games, rook e8 just to strike in the center straight away with e5, and the move that Hou Yifan played, e6. Why e6 and not rook e8 and e5 first? Well, normally white's queen goes to c2 in these types of positions, followed by rook a d1, and then you are looking with x-rays to this beautiful queen on d8. So that's why this queen is well placed on e7, where not only tries to help to push the e pawn, but also you remove the queen from this d-file that potentially will get open in many lines in this London system. So after e6, white played queen c2, and now queen e7 was a possible normal move. Let's say bishop h2, e5, and rook a d1. But instead, let's say rook f8. But instead, Hou Yifan decided to go for some different plan that is actually pretty interesting. She decided to go for knight h5. Now kicking this bishop back to h2, that it's the only reasonable square for this beautiful guy, and then f5, pushing the Facundo pawn and aiming to gain some space in the king side, when actually black could try to attack at some point, let's say some g5, g4 in the future, or and this joined by the fact that this bishop is extremely strong could actually try to create some problems to white's king. And now at this point in my database there were only 3 games where white played rook fd1 or b4 or knight d2. But at this point Borya played the novelty, the move d5. It's actually interesting, but we need to analyze all the facts. So for example, white's idea is of course to create some nice square in e6, and he's hoping that this knight somehow will reach the e6 square. This actually doesn't look so easy at this moment, but we'll see that it's actually quite possible. And one needs to ask the following question: well, what happens if I'm just hungry and wanna take all your pawns? Let's say e takes d5, c takes d5, and bishop takes c3. Pepe, what are you talking about? Stop talking stupid things, and I'm just gonna take your tasty pawns. Yeah. Okay. We have to say that black lost the bishop pair. And besides that, white is gonna recapture one pawn. After rook ac1, the c7 pawn is actually not possible to defend it. Let's say rook c8, bishop a6 is coming, and if you play c5, the d6 pawn is hanging, and if you go knight c5, there will come b4 followed by queen takes c7. So this is actually quite good for white, and black shouldn't go greedy and take this pawn on d5. And then there is only one reasonable attempt for black, that it's to close the position with e5. And now the question is, okay, why did I play d5 if I cannot jump to e6? Because we have given black a lot of space in the king side, and then the attack is even more dangerous, right? But there is actually a quite interesting move that happened in the game, that is the move g4. And one could ask, one could say, sorry, that why am I opening my own king with the white pieces? Well, the fact is that this knight has to retreat to f6, and only then this knight will be able to jump to g5 and then to the tasty square e6. Let's say if black plays knight f6, then knight g5 is actually quite strong. Not only we are aiming to go to e6, but also the f5 pawn is hanging. So that's why black has to take on g4, h takes g4, and knight f6. Of course, now white goes knight g5, and there is one huge threat. There is this fork on e6, so black has to do something about this. And this is the point where the game gets extremely interesting. So there are many interesting options at this point. So for example, the most natural move to our eyes could be knight c5, stopping knight e6. And at this point, b4 is actually a bad move, because if we play b4, there is knight g4, boom. And actually white is worse, because after b takes e5, queen takes g5, and after bishop takes g4, queen takes g5, and the bishop on g4 is hanging. So black is actually winning some material. So, but instead of b4, white could play f4. Now defending the g5 knight and aiming to go b4 in the next move and knight e6. That's why black should play a5 at this point. But after f takes e5, d takes e5, and let's say knight g e4, this is extremely complicated and interesting, because white's king is a little bit weak, but we have a lot of space in the center, and there's one weakness on e5, and we have a nice spot on e4 to occupy with either one of our knights or with the queen after all the exchanges, right? So this position was extremely complicated. There is another interesting move, that is knight takes g4, and then one could ask me again, Pepe, stop saying stupid things, and what happens after knight e6? Well, the queen can comes to h4, threatening mate in one, after bishop g3, queen h3, knight takes f8, rook takes f8, and black is an exchange down, but it has a lot of counterplay. There are so many tricks now in the position. For example, rook f2 is actually one beautiful trick that exists in the position, because you cannot take back with the bishop, since there is mate on h2, and if you take with the rook, then the bishop on g3 is hanging and the king is going to be extremely weak. I'm going to show you some lines so you can see what's going on here. Let's say if white wants to exterminate everything from the board, that is actually a nice idea when you are material up, but it's not that easy. Let's say queen g4, queen e4, and queen g5. And black is only an exchange down, it has a pawn up, and the king is extremely weak. You have nice squares for your pieces. You can regroup your bishop by a c8 at some point, maybe some h5 ideas as well. This king is extremely weak, so the Jin says it's actually a balanced position, but I would say it's even easier to play it with black. All right, so let's say if white tries to go in this position, queen e4, then it's the beautiful trick, boom, ba-boom, rook f2, and after rook takes f2, queen takes g3, rook g2, queen takes e3, give me, and knight takes e3, and we reach a really curious position where actually black has 4 pieces and 3 pawns against 2 rooks and 2 pieces. So this is extremely complicated, but I would say it's easier to play with the black pieces, since there are no open files for the rook. You have 3 passed pawns, and then you have nice squares for your pieces and nice diagonals for the bishops. So I would take black in this position, but instead after knight g5, Hou Yifan decides to play a really interesting queen sacrifice, and that is the move, queen takes d5. Brutal move, a brutal queen sacrifice that we need to calculate and analyze in depth to try to understand, because the first question is, what's going on? Where is the queen sacrifice? I just play knight e6, and then you have to move your queen, and then I will take with my c pawn defending my e6 knight, and then you have to resign. Well, that's not Yifan's idea. Instead, she has to take on c3, and then now the queen is hanging, so white has to take it. If you want to be subtle and then just play queen c3, you want to feel like a sir, then actually you are worse. After queen h4, bishop g3, knight f8 takes, and there are many threats in this position. The first one is rook f3. So if you do nothing about this, after rook a1, rook f3 is just winning the game on the spot, since queen g4 is gonna come. After bishop takes, boom, bishop takes f3, and then queen h3 or queen g2 followed by mate on g2, and yeah, nothing to do about this. So instead, if you want to close this diagonal with f3, no, I'm gonna open it with e4. Now this queen is so tasty, and I'm gonna capture this pawn on f3. So that's why after knight takes c3, white is forced to take on d8, and then intermediate move, knight takes e2, queen takes e2, and then we reach this position where actually white is a queen up, and black has only 1 piece in return from the queen. So okay, it's gonna have 2 pieces, but there is one intermediate move again, that this is the move bishop f3 at this point, because if you capture straight away the knight on d8, now actually white can play, let's say, f3, and then cut all the action from this diagonal, and white is just much better, just 1 queen in return, only 2 pieces. So after queen takes e2, bishop f3 is a really good move. Now forcing the queen to go to d3, knight c5, another intermediate move, queen a3, and we have reached another important moment in the game, where actually after taking this knight, you see the difference now with this bishop on f3. Who wants money, health, and love having this bishop on the board. Yeah, so this bishop actually puts this king in a really weak position. Actually, there are so many threats. Let's move on a little bit now. At this point, a5 was a really interesting move, given the fact that this knight is trapped. But okay, Hou took with the rook on d8, and there are so many plans now, so many annoying plans for white now. You can play rook f8, rook e8, a5, e4, and bishop e5, aiming to exchange this bishop, aiming to bring some rooks to the action, trying to give checkmate to this king, or even h5. So that's why at this point Borya didn't play the best move, but I can actually understand what he did, because he wants to remove this bishop at any cost from f3, because it's so annoying. It's so annoying that actually he went to play e4. That actually loses a pawn on the spot. But actually the idea is, if black takes on e4, then you can play b4, let's say knight e6 and rook a e1, forcing this bishop back. You want some tempi, and then you can play maybe f3 at some point, so this bishop is not so annoying anymore. You have some open files for the rook. But with really strong criteria, Yifan played rook f8. She thinks, okay, this is my best piece by far. I'll have time to capture all these weak pawns, right? The next move is rook a e1, following with the idea. No, it's not to defend the e4 pawn, that is lost anyway, but the idea from Borya is to remove this knight from f3. So let's say if black ensures this spot for the knight on c5, then you can go rook e3, and then you are forcing this bishop to go back, let's say taking on e4 or g4. Let's say bishop takes g4 and f3, and then your king can breathe, right? It was almost dying with this bishop on f3. But again, another really strong move from Hou Yifan, bishop h6. The idea is just to avoid this rook e3, and then actually you cannot move all your pieces here. You have three heavy pieces in the king side, but actually you cannot do anything. You cannot remove this bishop on from f3. So the only try for white is try to create some troubles on the queen side with the queen and the pawns, for example, or the rooks. So Borya plays b4, knight e6. Now Hou realizes that there is a nice square for the knight on d4 there. c5. So after you take everything on c5, there is some bishop e5, and then the knight on c5 is hanging. That's why Hou Yifan decides to go for knight d4, aiming to jump on e2, and this will win some more material. So that's why white decided to go queen d3, covering the e2 square and avoiding all these jumps, annoying jumps from this guy on d4. Hou Yifan knows that actually the position looks quite nice on the queen side. That's why she decides to close the queen side with b5. Now, if she can play slowly, let's say rook f7, rook a f8, bishop g5, and when you have ensured that actually all your pieces look so nice, you can start collecting pawns. For example, the g4 pawn is gonna fall anyway. So bishop g3, and she went to play bishop g5. As I told you, there is some ideas related to create a pass pawn and then to push it h4, h3, and this king is gonna look even more weak at that point. So bishop g5, a4 was played, a6, just a contention move, and queen a3. This is actually an interesting move. Now that after knight e2 you have this square for your king, this move actually stops black from putting double rooks on the f file, since if you play rook f7, a takes b5, you cannot recapture with your ideal pawn with a takes b5. So at this point Borya took on g4. Now that f3 is possible, you can take on g4, and then you have time to block this f file, even with your bishop or even with your knight. So rook d1 was played, another human move. So actually black was threatening knight f3 at this point. So rook d1, white is offering his exchange, but if in return, if he gains the light square black bishop, then will be happy. So let's say after bishop takes d1, rook takes e1, this king starts breathing, right? It's more happy now. So it can go to g2, Anyway, this position is good for black. Now black regain enough material. Let's say b takes and rook a e8. You have a rook and a piece and a pawn and 2 pawns, sorry, for the queen. So this is more than enough. But instead, Hou Yifan, she really liked her bishop here on g4. So she went to play knight f3 in this position, forcing king g2, and now d takes e5, b takes e5, and h5. And then this beautiful guy, this little pawn starts running as well, and starts creating some threats with h4 and h3. This bishop is gonna come to h2. There are no more squares for the bishop on g3. So queen a2 was played, king h7, sorry, and at this point then Jason was suggesting e takes b5, and queen b2. And after rook e8, since the e5 pawn is hanging, so c6, rook e7, rook d3. This looks extremely complicated, but it still looks more than okay for black. But instead, he went to play queen d5, another human move, attacking the e5 pawn, and rook e8. That's a really natural way of defending the e5 pawn. Queen c6, attacking Carlitos, the c7 pawn, and rook e7. And now one could ask again, why we don't take the a6 pawn and then start collecting all the guys from there? Well, let's try to analyze. There is actually a huge threat from black that white needs to deal with. Let's try to show it. So queen takes e6, b takes a4, queen takes a4, and boom, h4, bishop h2, only move, h3 check, king h1, knight takes h2, king takes h2, bishop f4 check, king g1, and bishop f3, just winning the game on the spot, since h2 is a beautiful mate that actually white cannot handle. So that's why after rook e7, white player decides to go for rook d3, and this rook d3 is really important because in this line where actually is quite forced, this pawn to h4, h3, knight takes h2, there has to be a piece that controls the third, the f3 square, so in case some bishop lands on f3, you can just take it with the rook. So that's why rook f3 was played. And at this point, h4, bishop h2, and b takes a4. Queen takes a4, and at this point, knight h2 was good enough to win the game. Let's say king h2, bishop e2, rook dd1, and rook e f7, just putting a lot of pressure. There are so many threats. You can regain material when you want. You can play some bishop f4 and bishop f3 at some point. This is so disgusting for white, right? I would like to be in white's position over there. So king h6 was played. Instead, queen a3, rook e f7, and now queen to b2, attacking the e5 pawn. They start dancing a little bit in this moment. So she went to play rook e7, c6, a5, rook b3, and king g7. And this is the moment where actually white loses control, but it's so easy to understand because black is improving the position a little bit. You can play a4, you can play king h6 back, and then rook e f7. At some point there are some ideas with knight d4 and bishop f3, or even h3 and knight takes h2, as we saw. And at this point white plays rook b5, that loses on the spot, forgetting that he had to control the f3 square. Therefore, after h3, king h1, knight takes h2, you cannot go king takes h2, because after bishop f4, again, there's the same trick with bishop f3 and h2, and this is checkmate, my friend. So white cannot take on h2, so he decided to go for rook e5, aiming to go for the last tricks. But after knight bishop f3, you cannot take on h2, because after bishop f4 and bishop takes e5 followed by h2, or in case that white takes on h3, there is mate on the h file. Wait, actually you are losing. So sorry, rook takes e5, bishop f3, king g1, knight f1, rook e7, king h6. This king is gonna dance until g4 is dancing some tango, some salsa. Let's say queen g7 that happened in the game, king h5, queen h7, king g4. This king is Leonidas from Sparta. Rook e8, last trick, rook takes e8, queen d7, king h4. You are threatening h2 and h1 queen. So king takes f1 and rook d8, check, king g4. There are no more checks in this position, and then rook d1 is coming in the next move. So white has to resign. And yeah, I think this was a really interesting game by Hou Yifan. You know, there were some beautiful games in the tournament, but in my opinion, this was the best by far. You know that something happened in the last round, but no one can say that this is not a beautiful game by Hou Yifan. The queen sacrifice was not clear at all, but she went for it as she won a really nice game. So I really enjoyed analyzing, so I hope you did the same by watching the video. So yeah, take care, have fun, and have a nice weekend. Don't party too much and just try to behave a little bit. Alright, bye bye. Ciao, ciao, hasta la vista.